Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Seekers podcast. Today is going to be fun. My guest today is Craig Watkins. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
You know, it's funny, we were talking a little bit earlier, but before we get started here, but it's funny how this sport is so weird in that I know you because I've seen you around the track for years, but we've never had a chance to actually sit down and talk. So that's what I'm going to admit. It's one of the great excuses for doing a podcast. I get to talk to people that I normally don't get a chance to. So it's going to be kind of fun to spend a little time talking to you and getting to know you even better. So
yeah.
So you've been one of those guys that's been around the sport for a long time, and you've been super successful in racing but it seems like you kind of worked your way up from the bottom, starting as a mechanic and then, got into engineering and you drive and you've kind of done everything. Was that the plan from the beginning?
No, it didn't really become a plan until it was never a plan. It was always, when I was a kid, I had two older brothers. One was 3 years older, or is 3 years older. The other one's 4 years older. And so, when your brothers are 11, 12, 13, and you're 7, 8 or whatever, you're just a punk to them.
Yeah.
And so they talked my parents into buying a go-kart for them to share. And they did, and Christmas or whatever. And then both of them lost interest in it. And then when they'd go to school and I was home, I would take their go-kart and drive it around my parents' property because, fortunately, we lived on a 2-acre parcel of property. So there's lots of room to run a go-kart around in, either on dirt or pavement.
Yeah. And,
it was kind of deal when they found out I was driving a go-kart, they'd beat me up and stuff like that. But they completely lost interest in go-karts. And I became completely enthralled with them and addicted to them. And so I spent, from the time I was about 10 years old until, I was maybe 13 or something like that, or 14. I drove them hours a week, just the same old loop in my parents' property over and over and over. And, I was sliding a thing here and there. And I didn't really know that was teaching me something that'd be valuable later in my life. I just loved driving the cart and trying to make it faster. And I didn't really think about pay attention to that stuff. I was just trying to go as fast as I could through these turns and not wreck or run into my mom's station wagon or something.
It's
so
funny.
Then is that that evolved into I saw a dune buggy, a little Volkswagen based dune buggy when I was 14 or 15, and I thought that's pretty cool. And so I had a paper route in those days, and I bought a Volkswagen Beetle for $75, and it didn't run. And so over the next couple of years, I took it all apart to the extent that I could, the tools that I had, and I fixed it up, got it running, and turned it into a little Baja bug or a little dune buggy. And that just these things just kept evolving. Then I started going down to Pismo Beach all the time. To drive the sand buggy there, and there were other people there that had big tires and all that stuff, and my buggy kept getting stuck in the sand and all that stuff. And so over the years, I learned how to make those cars work well in the sand and so on. And then a friend of mine, that went on until I was probably in my early 20s. Then a friend of mine said, "Hey, let's go out to Barstow. They've got these off-road races that they're running out at Barstow."
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's a natural evolution. So we went out to Barstow and watched one of these off-road desert races there. There were most of them were based on VW cars. They had a VW front beam, swing arm beam, and trailing arm rear suspension and stuff.
Yeah,
they were single-seat cars or two-seat tube chassis, but they had fundamentally Volkswagen suspension, and so that was right up my alley. So I went to these races and became enthralled with them. Not only on how to build them, but how to drive through the desert. So over the years, I built a car, an off-road car, and started racing it. And I just completely got my ass handed to me in the first race. I think there were 49 cars in my class, or 250 cars or something like that in the race, and there were 49 in my class. and I finished, just basically dead last. I had no idea how to read the desert. I had no idea what setup meant as far as damping or what spring rates to run. I just figured the stiffer the better. It turned out not to be true.
Yeah.
And the car worked like hell, and it beat me senseless. And yeah, it's true. And by then I was 23 or 20. No, I was about 24 or 25. And but at the same time, about the same time, I was building VW racing engines, Formula V racing engines with Jim Wild down in Santa Clara, California. And, it was very precision work. We worked very hard to, you have to remember, Ross, in these days, Formula V engines made 49 horsepower.
Yeah.
And, when we built an engine that made 49 horsepower, we'd celebrate. We'd go over to Marie Callender's and eat a bunch of corn bread and have a beer or whatever.
Right.
So that was great. And then as I said in that thing I wrote you, one of our customers was a Stanford grad, very, very smart guy. He ended up starting Go Power Dynos, and which became Superflow, I think. And he had, as I said, he had a couple of degrees in thermodynamics. And when I was 24 then, I think, and I'd never heard of the word thermodynamics, or if I had, I certainly didn't know what it meant. And so after I got to know him a little better over time, I said, what does thermodynamics mean? He said, well, it's a study of heat transfer. And I thought, well, why is that important? And he told me why it was, and that engines basically followed a heat cycle, an Otto cycle, but a heat cycle nevertheless of creating heat, dissipating heat, and creating energy, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, where do you learn that kind of stuff? He said, engineering school. And I thought to myself, holy moly, that's what I want to learn.
Yeah.
So I hadn't gone to college after high school, like a lot of my friends, because I had no idea what I wanted to study, and I didn't want to go, to college and study something I didn't like. So I just worked, and then, but this whole thermodynamics thing really changed my life. And then I was admitted or enrolled into a local junior college within a couple of months of that, and then started Cal Poly. Eventually applied and got into Cal Poly, and then studied manufacturing engineering down there. They were the only school, they and either University of Michigan or it was Ohio State that had degrees in actually manufacturing engineering. And I thought to myself, that's pretty awesome, because, I liked San Luis Obispo because I'd spent a lot of time going to Pismo Beach and the dune buggy, so I knew that area well.
Yeah. And
it had this manufacturing engineering degree. And so I got into Poly and got my degree there. And while I was doing that, I built that off-road car, that single-seat off-road car, and raced it to the extent that I could. And as I said, I completely got my ass handed to me. And I was so bad. The car worked so poorly, and I knew nothing about setup. But, I started, I'd put a different damper on here and a different rate compression or whatever, and I didn't really know what all those meant, but I tried different stuff. And over the years, I got the car, so it was actually working pretty well. And, I could run in the top 20 cars and stuff like that. So over about a 5-year period, I started to get the car, so it was actually pretty decent, just listening to what other guys had to say and what they'd willing to share with me and so on. And then when I got out of college, my father wanted me to, he wanted me to follow sort of the conventional career path. And so I applied for a job at HP in Palo Alto and got it. And so I worked at HP for 5 or 6 years. And during that time, I started racing more seriously with a friend named Greg Aronson, who owned a VW performance shop down in Orange, California, named Fat Performance, they really became, Fat was probably one of the premier leaders in VW performance development, Volkswagen air-cooled, and then later water-cooled engine development.
Yeah.
And Greg and I got to be really good friends. And about 84, I said, why don't we build an off-road car together and run it in the off-road series, in the Score off-road series. So we did that. Actually, I think it was 83, because we started in racing together in 84 and ran the 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, all the the full score, which stands for Southern California Off-Road Enthusiasts, a series, including the Baja 500, Baja 1000, Parker Dam 400, and all that stuff. And we got to be pretty good. We were never like the team to beat. Maybe one year we were, maybe 88, 89, we actually were probably the team to beat. But, one of our success really came because the car was, we knew how to build a reliable car, and we knew how to run along at a decent pace.
Yeah.
And so that leads us to about 1990. And then unfortunately we were in an accident. Greg hit a spectator in the dust. He was unfortunately an unhappy accident, but fortunately it didn't kill the guy. But he was drunk at 8:30 in the morning and walking across the track, which you have to remember, an off-road racing track is not a track at all. It's just a bunch of it's roads out in the desert, or old utility roads or mining roads and stuff like that in the desert. So it's not really a track. You can go anywhere out there you want. So this guy was walking across the track, and Greg was following a guy in the dust and didn't see him. And then suddenly this human figure appears in the dust, and he hit him and broke his legs and it screwed him up. And so after that, Greg said, I just can't stay on the gas in the dust anymore. And if you can't stay on the gas in the dust in off-road racing, you can't be fast, because you have to be able to drive in conditions that are basically complete whiteouts while you're catching the car in front of you. You have to, you'll end up going through periods of, many seconds sometimes where you cannot see what is in front of you. You just have to hope you know the course well enough. And you have to drive through that complete whiteout of dust and just stay on the throttle, and eventually the silhouette of the car in front of you starts to materialize, and then you just go for the throat. So as far as passing, you don't just come up behind him and then go figure out a way you're going to go around him like you do on a road course. You bump him. You have a good front bumper and you bump them. And if they don't get out of the way, the first bump, you slam them the next time, because you just can't take a chance of getting caught up in that dust again, because it's easy to wreck the car.
Yeah. So
you become very aggressive with passing in that way. So once Greg couldn't do that anymore, it's funny because they called us the Craig and the Greg show, because his name was Greg and my name's Craig, and we're both 6'5", and people keep saying, "Are you Greg? Are you Craig?" And so it's sort of this ongoing joke. But so by the end of 1989, the start of 1990, Greg said, I can't do this anymore. So we stopped. We sold the car. And also, as I told you, but in the evolution, I started, I had a 1973 911T that I was driving to work every day when I was at HP. And I started entering some of these, they were called time trials in those days, that Porsche Club of America did. And so I took the car to those time trials. I didn't know anything about track cars at all. I'd been driving off-road stuff, go-karts and off-road stuff, basically from the time I was 14. Oh, no, I was probably 10 until I was 35 or so. So I didn't really know track racing, but I went to these club events anyway, because I wanted to keep racing. And I met Johannes van Overbeek and his father, Tom, at a time trial, Laguna Seca, in 1990. He's 20 years my junior. So in 1990, I was 38, I guess, or 37. So he was 17. And, even though we're 20 years difference in age, we just naturally got along. And over the years, we'd see each other at the time trials and stuff like that. And we just always naturally got along, and his dad too. And so over the years, Johannes and I got to be better friends and better friends. And then he went off to school at Chico. But all through the 1990s, I concentrated on, basically, my wife would say, "Oh, you're converting your street car that you take to work every day into a racing car?" I'd say, "Yes." And she'd say, "You're crazy." I'd say, "Maybe so, but that's what I'm doing."
Yeah.
And so I converted my street car, my 911T, into a full GT4 car. In those days, PCA GT4, which was unlimited everything, but you were limited in those days to a 2.7 liter engine. So, yeah, so I started doing that, and I didn't know how to, I didn't really know what caused oversteer and understeer. I thought, I'll drive these things like I drive an off-road car, which is they oversteer all the time. And I got pretty good at handling a car that oversteers, which 911s tend to do. And then I started to realize after, watching some of these guys that you really don't want to go through the turn with the back end drifting because it's not faster. And so my mentality about racing changed. I started to think, oh, okay, this is not off-road racing. This is, it's all about getting the car balanced. And so you can drive through the turn without sliding the car. Okay, once in a while you have to slide the car a little bit, like four-wheel drift or something like that. That's normal, but you have to be able to do that in a controlled way. And so then I started messing around with sway bars and spring changes, and I was just never satisfied with the way the car worked. Not because I knew necessarily what the changes did. I just would make changes for change's sake. And sometimes the results were good and sometimes the results were not. But over the course of from about 1995 to 2000, I raced every club race I could find, on the West Coast, and even went back to Mid-Ohio and Road America and stuff like that. And then out of the blue, and through that, all those years of club racing, at the amateur level, Johannes and I kept in touch, just because we had become pretty good friends. And he called me in 1999 or early 2000 and said, look, I've drummed up enough sponsor money to buy a couple of 911 GT3 or 996 GT3s, and we want to run two cars in SCCA's World Challenge GT. I said, that's cool. He said, well, I want you to be the engineer, and I'll pay you $75,000 a year to do it. I was like, huh? And I said to my wife, oh, I'm gonna quit my full-time job, and I'm going to do this with Johannes, and I'm going to make more money actually than I'm making at my job then, and I'm going to engineer this racing car. And she was like, well, okay.
Yeah.
So Johannes and I did 2 full years of World Challenge GT. And you got to remember, in those days, Ross, we had no money.
Yep.
We
been there.
We had, we had nothing. So we flew together. We stayed in the same hotel room together. Fortunately, we like the same kind of foods. We have similar sleep habits and all that stuff. So, we'd eat the same restaurants, and we just became complete travel buddies over the 2-year period. And sometimes, for example, there'd be a race at like Mont Blanc, for example, and then the following weekend there'd be a race at Mid-Ohio or something like that. So rather than come all the way back to California and have to fly back to the Midwest, we just didn't have the dough. So we just rent a car and we'd stay. We'd figure out, okay, well, we've got 3 or 4 days to kill, so let's, we'd end up going to like the Baseball Hall of Fame or, Budweiser plant, or, we'd do all these sort of sightseeing things around mostly the Midwest and the East, because that's where all the races were primarily, except for Laguna and Sears Point. So we got to be really, really good friends in those days, just very organically.
Yeah. Spent
a ton of time together. And then we ran a couple of 24 hours at Daytona with a 911 GT 996 GT3. Let's see, it was a GT3 RS, I think it was. It was either an R or an RS. We ran Daytona with it, and I'll be damned if we didn't finish second or third with a borrowed car. And true to form with Johannes, there were 4 drivers. I think David Murray, Johannes, and then the 2 guys that owned the car. And then I did the engineering and stuff. And then we had a crew of some other people too. But it turned out the two guys, Johannes had great pace. Actually, the car was pretty fast. We got the car, so it was pretty fast. And Johannes had excellent pace, and Murray had decent pace. But the two owners just were terrible, absolutely terrible. And so the guy that we'd hired to do strategy, a guy named Thomas Blom, who became a coworker at Flying Lizard Motorsports, we had hired him to do the strategy. And, I'd never heard of strategy before. I'd never heard of the word strategy for endurance racing. I just thought, you get in the car, you go like hell, and you go through the pit stops, and then at the end, if the guy that's the fastest will win the race. And it's as simple as that. So what the hell do you need strategists for? And then, so we had that. We hired Thomas for that race. I think it was 01 or 02, 24 Hours Daytona. And as I said, the car was fast, and Johannes was putting down some. I mean, we were running in the front of the race, not the leading, but we were in the top. I don't know, 3 or 4 for sure. But these other two guys, the other two owners, were just painfully slow. And and Thomas Blom, little did I know that I'd get to know Thomas so well, but Thomas Blom just was, his head looked like it was exploding when he'd look at these lap times these guys were doing, and we were losing position, and he was just freaking out. And so he'd tell Johannes, get ready, you're going back in the car. And Johannes like, yeah, okay. So Johannes get back in the car and go out there, and we'd slowly slog the car back up, to the front 4 or 5 cars and stuff like that. So make a long story short, Johannes drove some incredible amount of hours during that. Drove something like, 17 or 18 hours of the 24 hours. By the time the race was over, he didn't have enough energy to get himself out of the car. I mean, I could hear his voice in the radio to this day.
Yeah.
He was completely physically used up. And so, we were a podium finisher. I said, Johannes, come on, we got to, we podium this car. I think we're in second, I think. And so let's go to the podium. So I had to help him, like I was helping my 100-year-old father go to the podium, because he was completely, his skin was this ashen gray. His eyes were sunk in his skull. But you know what? In all those hours of driving that car, he rarely complained. He'd say he's beat and he's used up, but he just kept going. And as I said, we had to lift him out of the car because he was utterly exhausted.
Yeah.
And so that was a big moment for me, because I'd never been at Daytona, or had been once before, and was very intimidated by Daytona. Just his size, and I'd been a big NASCAR fan in those days, in the 70s and 80s, and Richard Petty, and then Dale Earnhardt, and those guys. They were sort of heroes of mine. Not really heroes, but they're guys that I really admired. And I watched those races, and Daytona was legendary. Yeah. And there I was, little Craig Watkins from Menlo Park. There I was engineering a car at Daytona. That just didn't make any sense. So after that, I started to think to myself, oh, whoa, there's a lot to this strategy thing. It's very important to have a strategist for these long races and so on. And then later, and I hope I'm not boring you, but then later, that spring, Johannes hooked up with a guy named Seth Nyman, who wanted to test the same car he ran at Daytona on a couple of test days up at Thunder Hill. So we did, and Johannes said, I want you to come along and engineer the car, Craig. So we did. And by then, we had been working with a guy named Tommy Sadler through G&W Motorsports in Virginia, and got me good friends with Tommy. And Tommy had become the crew chief. And so we did these tests with Seth Nyman and a guy named Lonnie Pechnick. And we did 2 or 3 tests. And after the 3rd test that spring, which I think was sometime maybe later April, Seth took us all out to dinner and said, okay, you knuckleheads, I want to start a racing team. And Craig, I want you to be the engineer. Tommy, I want you to be crew chief. Johannes, you'll be one of the drivers. We'll have a 2-car team. You'll be one of the drivers. Lonnie and I will drive 1 car, and then we'll figure out a 4th driver to drive the car with you, Johannes. And I thought, oh, okay. Okay, that sounds great. And then he said, yeah, we're going to call the team Flying Lizard Motorsports. And I looked over at Johannes, and my eyebrows sort of went up, and I said to Seth, Seth, with all due respect, I think Flying Lizard Motorsports is a pretty peculiar name for a racing team. And he said, you don't understand something, Craig. It might be peculiar and unusual, but we're going to create a brand. And you know what, Ross? I had no idea what he meant. I didn't know what he meant by brand. No, I just, when I was in engineering school, I just constantly, if it was not engineering related, if it was an English class or a statistics class or a chemistry class, I didn't pay much attention. I get through with a respectful C, and that was good enough. If it wasn't hardcore engineering stuff like kinematics or statics or thermo or whatever it was, I wasn't interested. Which, in hindsight, I wish I had not done that. But that was my mindset at the time. So I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about branding. And so, within about 60 days, Flying Lizard Motorsports was formed. I was interviewed with Seth. He hired me, gave me a contract, full benefits. I was employee number 2, and we built the team from there. Of course, we brought Thomas Blum on to be the chief strategist. We ultimately went through a bunch of driver testing. We brought Darren Law on to be the driver with Johannes. And Tommy Sadler was crew chief. I hired a guy named Eric Ingraham to be the team manager and logistics manager who Johannes and I had used in the World Challenge GT days. Eric Ingraham, and he became ultimately a team manager of Flying Lizard, and that's how the whole thing grew. And and Seth came at the end of that one of those meetings in 2003. He said, "Okay, the toughest series in the country is ALMS, and that's what we're going to do." And I thought to myself, "Holy moly, we're gonna run ALMS like with the pro guys with like Bill Oberlin and Derek Bell and some of these other, Hans Stuck, and I mean all these iconic names. Like I can't. I'm just over my head." But so we started an ALMS, and ended up being one of the most, or it was the premier time of my life as far as a career, because I learned so much, not only as an engineer, but how to be a better manager of myself, of the people around me. And Seth really taught us how to manage well and effectively and plan ahead. Yeah. He would just beat that into us over and over and over. And if you used words like, well, I'm going to do it as soon as possible, he would bite your head off. The word as soon as possible, that phrase, if you learned early on with Flying Lizard Motorsports, you do not utter those words because they are completely meaningless. There's no commitment to them at all. And you hear it all the time. People say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do it as soon as possible." Well, what does as soon as possible mean? Does it mean an hour from now? Does it mean a week from now? Does it mean a month from now? Does it mean a year from now? It's ambiguous. So if Flying Lizard Motorsports, you never were allowed to use ambiguous phrases or terms. You had to make a commitment to what you're going to do. When you said you're going to do something and said it was going to be done by a certain time, it needed to be done by a certain time. So that's the way Flying Lizard was operated.
Yeah.
For all of us. It wasn't just Craig Watkins, it was all of us.
Yeah.
And the result was pretty good. We got to be a pretty good team.
You guys won a lot.
We won a lot. Yeah, we did. And we had some, it was a combination of having really good drivers and excellent crew members and excellent team members and good planning. Good luck for sure. I mean, there's always good luck luck is just part of the deal, but you can make your own luck to a certain degree as well. Just by proper preparation and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and then in 2007, I think it was, we became a development team, the factory development team for Porsche. And that really changed my career because I started working with an engineer, a Porsche engineer named Roland Kusmal, who I'd heard of course, through the years of I started reading about Roland Kusmal back in the 80s when they were running the Paris-Dakar 911s in the desert of Africa and so on. So I'd known about Roland Kusmal for decades. And to think that I'd start working with a guy of his caliber was pretty intimidating for me. But he was the most generous and sharing. He was sort of he was sort of the opposite of sort of the strict, stern German man that a lot of people sort of associate with a lot of German men as being very strict and stoic. And he is strict and he is stoic. But he's also he's got a great sense of humor. And he's also very open with sharing information. And so over the years, I learned so much about damping or damping adjustments on the cars in a way from him that I never would have learned otherwise. And here's really one of the key things, Ross.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to learn how to tune a car with damping.
Yeah.
To intuitively know. So the driver says, as soon as you turn in, the car's got oversteer. I mean, right now, I think to myself, we got to soften the compression damping in the back and stuff like that. But in those days, I think to myself, holy moly, let's see, is it, the spring's too stiff or maybe too much sway bar, or maybe you need to lower the rear right height a little bit. But now I think to myself, dampers are my sort of go-to adjustment because you can just destroy grip and weight transfer with damper adjustments. And so, anyway, long story short is I learned a ton from Roland Kussmaul. And one of the things that was very revealing to me is, okay, so Flying Lizard, we ran 8 or 9, 10 races a year, including Le Mans. And so you think to yourself, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of track days. That's a lot of test days. But what I started to understand about working with these Porsche guys, not just the guys like Roland Kussmaul, but the works drivers like Jörg Bermeister and Mark Lieb and Timo Bernhard and Patrick Long, guys like that. Those guys were in race cars hundreds of days a year. I mean,
yeah.
They weren't just driving, 8, 10, times a year. They were driving all the time, either testing at Weissach or testing cars here and there. So I realized those guys are just in a league by themselves. That's a difficult league to compete with. And so I went through a period of being very intimidated working with those guys because, if when you're working with those guys, they expect the result. So for example, let's just say the driver comes in and says, the driver would pit and I'd say, how's the car? And he'd say, corner entry, it's understeering, and then it hooks up and then goes to oversteer. And I think to myself, oh, okay. So I have to fix one first before I can fix the other. And let me just stop here for a second, Ross. And I know I'm probably talking too much. And if you want me to stop talking, just say. I'll stop talking.
Well, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about car setup stuff here in a minute.
Okay.
And in fact, I think this is a really good one because I've experienced that, and I know many drivers have experienced that. The car understeers a little bit on corner entry, and then it gets loose on the exit. And most drivers are like, fix that oversteer because it's going to kill me. But
right.
Sometimes it's the understeer that caused the oversteer and the driver not identifying that. Is that kind of where you were going?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I learned over the years of working with these guys. For example, what I was saying was that the point I was trying to make is the heat you're under when you work with these drivers of this level. The difference between working with them, working with Johannes, was Johannes and I are pals. And Johannes would say, Craig, the car's doing this, that, and this. And if I made an adjustment to the car and it didn't fix it, the next time he was in, he'd say, okay, it's still doing this. It's still doing this. It's a little better here, there. And then we'd make another change. Then he'd come back in after a couple laps and say, okay, now it's doing this. Now it's doing that. And that was the cadence of which we fixed things. The works guys were, okay, the car has corner entry understeer and then it leads to corner exit oversteer. I'd say, okay. So I'd make a change to the car. And then they'd go out and run the car for one time to lap, bring the car in and say, it's no different. And I think to myself, what do you mean it's no different? And then a couple of times, Patrick Long would say, Craig, can you come out to the car? And he looked at me. And you got to remember, you got to just imagine yourself in this situation, Ross. You got a guy who's in the car, who's going as fast as he can possibly go. He's full of adrenaline. The sweat's running down his brow. And he looks at you. This happened two times with Patrick Long. He looked at me, and his eyes, his eyes were just like, he just looked crazy. He looked like a crazy man.
Yep.
He looked at me and say, Craig, the car isn't any different. And the first time he did that to me was at Long Beach. And I said, I was blown away at the intensity in his eyes. I mean, I completely respected it, but it was very startling to me. It just made me realize this guy is all about business, and he's used to people making changes to the car that you can see a result. So I said, look, Patrick, I've got a plan here, but I've got to go through a couple of test things here to find my way. I think it's an anti-dive. I think the car's got too much anti-dive in the front, and that's why it has this turn-in understeer. So bear with me. We're tiptoeing up on the changes here. And he'd say, it was like his attitude and his face completely changed. He was like, okay, good, let's do it. And we'd do it, and we'd change the anti-dive percent, and it got better and better and better, and so on and so forth. The point I'm making is the heat you're under in these situations is intense, because these guys, and Johannes and those guys included, they expect results. It's just that the difference between Johannes was he and I had a different sort of friendship, in that Johannes is just more calm by nature. He doesn't lose his composure. Patrick is much more intense by nature, and he didn't lose his composure. He was just, he wanted results right now, and understandably. So those guys, working with that variety of people, it makes you raise your game, and you get better and better and better at what you're doing. And you start to, I started keeping a log. I started a little Excel sheet, and the Excel sheet had 4 columns. It was problem. See what was on the list here. It was problem, cause, change, and results. So he'd tell me what the problem was. Let's say classic corner exit understeer. So I'd look at my little line, my little chart, and say corner exit oversteer, right? And then the next thing was cause, front axle too stiff, tire temperature is too low, tire temperature is too high, camber angle not correct, tire temperature is not correct. And so then I note what the change was. So, for example, what if we change the spring rate, or we change the sway bar position, or the tires were underinflated or whatever? We make these changes, and I say underinflated, I mean like a pound off, 2 pounds off. It's not like they're flat; they were just a couple pounds off or whatever it was. We make those changes, and then so I built up this chart over the course of 10 years of these cause and effect type things. It would save me time when the cars were running on track. So if the driver said oversteer, I'd say, okay, it's high speed. Where's it oversteer? Turn 12 at Atlanta. That's high speed. So I'd say to myself, well, you're not going to be able to pick up more mechanical grip by making a chassis change. You have to make an aero change. So you got to add more rear wing angle, or put a taller gurney in it, or whatever it is. And you'd get result that way. So you have to ask the driver, okay, where is it oversteering? Is it oversteering on the slow corners, like turn 10A and 10B at Atlanta, where those are slow turns. Those are not an aero turn. Those are purely mechanical grip type turn. So no oversteer there. Oversteer is turn 1, turn 12, turn 7. I'd say to myself, those are all high speed turns. So we have to fix it aerodynamically. So you could change the ride height of the car a little bit to increase the aero downforce, put more wing in it, or not put more wing in it, put a little taller gurney in it, and so on and so forth. So, where am I going?
So Craig, I think you nailed a really important point in that. I think a lot of drivers go, the car's oversteering, fix it. They don't ask more questions like you are. To me, one of the things that the best engineers do is they ask more questions, then they dig deeper and finding out where it is. And even to the point of, well, what are you doing when the car is oversteering? Have you dialed in more steering? Are you coming off the brakes? Are you still on the brakes? Are you on the throttle? Those kinds of things. And I think, and maybe that's the difference of having somebody who's a designated engineer who can ask those questions.
Well,
Is that?
I'll share this with you, Ross, that I learned over the years, and I learned this early on with Johannes, in that sometimes I'd ask him a question, because I mean, here's the process. Here, this is a very important process. So when you're driving a car, the car. Let me start over again. A race car, or a track car, or a street car can never ever not follow the basic three laws of Newtonian physics. It is impossible. So with that said, if you don't understand the basic laws of motion, it's very hard to understand what's going on with a race car, or any car for that matter.
Yeah.
So once I started to understand that the car wasn't doing something that was magical, it was following the basic laws of Newtonian physics. So then you take that concept and you say to yourself, well, the driver, you're a driver, Ross, so you're in the car, you're driving the car, and it's behaving a certain way. So you're trying to interpret what the car is doing. So you come in and you either talk to me on the radio, or I come out to the car and talk to you, and you say the car is doing this and this and that. So what are you doing? You're interpreting what the car is doing and trying to convert it into you're converting a feeling, a physical experience that you're having, and you convert that into the spoken word. That's not an easy translation. That's a very difficult translation for the human mind to make. Yeah. So you make that change in your mind, and then I'm listening to what you're saying, and I need to convert what you're telling me in your spoken word into my mind and convert those spoken words into the three basic laws of Newtonian physics, because the car cannot do anything outside of those basic laws. It's impossible. So you can see, so what I learned in the early days was if I wasn't getting the answer that I wanted or I needed from the driver, the key words weren't coming out of the driver's mouth yet, I'd ask the same question, basically exactly the same question, but I'd change the word order or use slightly different words to basically ask the same question. Yep. And when the human mind hears that, you think about it a little bit differently. And all I was looking for, Ross, was a key word like, oh yeah, the high speed stuff. It's high speed. Oh yeah, it's high speed. Oh well. So then I think to myself, well, in the future, I need to say to these guys, where is it? Does it have oversteer? Is it on high speed stuff or low speed stuff? Is it corner exit? Where is it? So the psychology. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you that's all well and good for somebody with an engineering degree and somebody that knows the three basic laws that old Newton came up with years ago. But what if I'm Joe truck driver or Josephine truck driver? I'm out in my Cayman for the weekend, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it turns into the corner the way I want. Where do I start?
Tire pressures, man. I cannot emphasize even if you had only enough money to buy one tool, I would buy a good quality tire pressure gauge, and that's all. If that was the only thing I had, that's what I'd buy. You have to. I would encourage people to buy a good quality tire pressure gauge, either digital or analog, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And use that, and only that one for the car. Don't have one weekend and another the next weekend. Use the same one all the time, and keep good records, just simple records of what the tire pressure is. And the normal good sweet spot of any tire is usually like a 2 or 3 pound range. So if you're running a Hoosier or a Michelin or something like that, maybe it's like, depending on the weight of the car and the axle and so on, it might be 31 to 33 pounds, or 40 to 43 pounds, or something like that. There's some window where you get optimum grip. So I would encourage your listeners to, if they aren't keeping good records of what the tire pressures are doing, you're going to drive yourself crazy. They are, people look at these tires like they're just these rubber things, like look like donuts and stuff. They are what it's all. The tires are what it's all about. So you have to optimize what the tire can do, and you do that largely with pressures and camber and stuff like that. But pressures are absolutely number one.
Well, it's funny.
For example, the flying. So go ahead.
No, no. And I was just going to jump in there and say, funny thing, was about a year or so ago, I was at a track in a car club event, and somebody was saying, well, I run my tires at 32 psi, but my friend over here has got the exact same car, the exact same tires, and he runs them at 36, and I can't figure out why my car just doesn't feel good that same way. So we checked tire pressure gauges, and the tire pressure gauges were off by 3 psi. So
yeah, exactly.
To your point of always use that same tire pressure gauge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's so important.
And so basic, but can screw you up so bad. So sorry to jump in there. Yeah. But and you were saying, I mean, tire pressures. If I had the next step, if I could go beyond tire pressures, what would it be?
Tire temperatures. Because the tire temperatures tell you if your camber angle is right.
Yeah.
And so tire temperatures, you take about an inch from the inside shoulder, and then in the center of the tire, and then about an inch from the outside shoulder. And, there are a bunch of people that make, I particularly like, it's a company, I think they're in Wisconsin or Minnesota, Intercomp, I think.
Yeah.
I particularly like their gauges. So you get, to me, tire temperatures and pressures are very, very telling as to what's going on. As far as number one, is the tire even in the window of making maximum grip? So let me just take a little tangent here.
Yeah.
So back in the old days, I say the Flying Lizard days. For example, when a car came in from the track and we put the car up on air jacks, the first thing that we do, no one would touch the car except for the tire guys. Car would go up in the air. The tire guys would go out, take the tire pressures, write them down, take the tire temperatures, write them down, and then the mechanics could go over the car and check the car out and wait for our instructions to what changes to make to the car. But the whole thing started around tire temperatures and tire pressures. And you have to do that immediately because the whole system will heat soak. And the more it heat soaks, the less accurate the readings will be. So you want to get those pressures. You want to pit the car. For example, a place like Daytona has a very, very long pit lane. And so you come off track at 160 miles an hour or whatever it is, but it takes you 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever to get to your pit box. And by then you've lost a bunch of heat. So you don't really know what the operating pressure was, on NASCAR 3 or NASCAR 4, for example. You don't have that information because you've lost it. So you have to hustle into the pits. So you have to keep track of that pressure. The other thing is with camber. Oh, you were asking about the different windows. Oh yeah, between my car being good at 33 and yours is good at 36, and why and the tire pressure gauges were different. That's very important. Then you follow up with the temperatures, and the temperatures will tell you if a tire is sort of the Michelin engineers. Oh, we always had a Michelin engineer with us for every session in the Flying Lizard days, and if the tire was not in a certain temperature window, from maybe 170 to 210 degrees, he'd say the tire's not even turned on yet. If it was below 170, he'd say that's how he referred to it. As the tire wasn't even turned on yet. So, go out and drive the car harder. So, that he'd tell that to me. So I'd say to the driver, the tires aren't there yet. So you need to go out and hustle the car a little more. So,
but and kind of taking it in, I've had that experience as a driver, as a coach and everything. But I'm also thinking about, again, track day driver out on the weekend. And how do they know, short of the tire temperature? And, as my experience, it's difficult sometimes to find the information, from Michelin. They're not going to publish that, the tire temp's got to be, or it probably will, but it's hard to get that information out of the tire companies. So you're going, I don't know whether my tire temps are at the right temp. But the car is really loose, like an oversteer is coming as I put the power down. And it may be because there isn't enough tire temps yet, but it's scaring me. The car is scaring me. So I don't want to push even harder. So it's that breaking through that barrier as a driver. And how often do you, as an engineer, working with that driver, and it's very different than working with Johannes or Patrick Long or whoever, where you're working with a driver that they don't have the confidence yet. So do you give them some rear grip, do something to make the car so they can drive it harder? Then they drive it harder. Then they get more heat in the tires. And now we maybe have a different problem, but at least we're working in the right range. Does that make any sense?
It does. We were I was lucky. We were lucky to have the Michelin engineers there, or a Michelin engineer at trackside with us the whole time. And the tire companies are very, very closed-mouthed about pressures and temperatures and so on. It's a very competitive business, and they always err on the side of caution, and they should, because you can destroy a car and kill somebody if you're cavalier with tire temperatures or pressures. So you have to be very careful of that.
Yeah.
But they tell us, what they thought the maximum temperature should be, and particularly the inside shoulder. That was the key. That's the hardest part of the tire for the designers to make, is the intersection of the surface of the tire to the sidewall. That's a very critical and difficult. That's where nearly all tire failures come from, is that intersection. You see it from semi tires all the time. They run a little bit. They'll start to run low, and then the tread just completely parts company with the sidewalls, and the sidewalls are left on the rim. So you see that fairly often on the street. But the temperatures and pressures, you can get away with quite a bit with pressures as far as going up and down, but you need to understand that the tire companies will always default to the safest setting. So, for example, a little rule of thumb that I use on all my cars and my wife's car and stuff like that, we'll say the company calls out for a 38 front and 40 rear. I automatically immediately soften them by 10%, because they're giving you those numbers because that's where the tire will be its most efficient fuel-wise, will be able to carry gross vehicle weight and do the things that it must do. But for the way I drive my cars, the way Jennifer drives her car and stuff like that, she's never going to have gross vehicle weight in her car. So you get you soften the tires about 10%. They ride better and they create more grip. So that's one of my default things. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but I do. Yeah, in the old days with Porsche, early 911s, like up to about 73 or 74, you'd open the little gas door and there'd be a little sign in there that would say street or highway drive, city driving, 28 front, 32 rear, Autobahn, 32 front, 35 rear, something like that. But those days are long gone.
Yeah.
Now they all default to what is absolutely the safest, because they don't want, they don't want tires catastrophically failing, which they can do.
Well, and as you say, their manufacturers are also very focused on fuel economy, because that dictates so much in the world. Everything from car prices to everything else. So
exactly.
Looking for low rolling resistance, right?
Low rolling resistance, but it's not just it's that for sure. But also, imagine if you have like a Ford pickup truck or something like that. They have to set the pressures in there, so you can go to Home Depot or whatever and put 1,000 pounds in the back of the truck of stuff, of bricks or wood or whatever it is, and the tires still be able to maintain the support that it needs to, carrying that load. But when you're driving around without 1,000 pounds in the bed of the truck, the thing rides like a buckboard.
Yeah.
So I'm very diligent personally about tire pressures. When I'm running around town, I have a 3/4 ton Ford truck that I use to go to the races with, And when I'm running around town, I run the rear tires at 60 pounds and the front at 55. When I'm gonna pull a trailer, I bump the rears up to 70 because that's where they should be.
Yeah.
But when I'm not running around carrying a bunch of weight, why have all that extra pressure in the tires? They ride badly, and
Yeah.
I don't know if the economy's changed. I doubt it very much. But so the manufacturer's in a tough position, and they need to optimize the safety and the efficiency of the tire. So those what those pressures are.
Right. Well, Craig, I don't want to take up all your day here, but hey, and I know, I mean, you have a website, Smart Racing Products, and you're kind of got the standard in terms of the alignment equipment with smart strings and camber gauge and stuff, all that kind of stuff. But obviously this whole world of tuning your car and everything, that's your life. If you could give drivers listening to this show, and we're going to focus this on the drivers. If you could give drivers just one piece of advice that would help them perform better, and that could be car stuff, it could be driving stuff, it could be whatever. What would that one piece of advice, your speed secret, be?
Well, I don't know if there is a speed secret per se, but we live in a world today that I didn't live in when I was first coming up through this whole business. We have an age of data acquisition that's inexpensive. You can buy those AIM systems, and this Motec is at the very high end. Maybe Garmin. I don't know if they make stuff like that, but there are companies out there that make these remarkably inexpensive and productive little data acquisition devices.
Yeah.
That are very, very useful. And there's so much access to people's videos and podcasts like this. I mean, there's just so much information available to a driving enthusiast now that wasn't available 20 years ago. So, and I mean, the old days, you just read Carol Smith's books on how to engineer or how to drive or whatever it was, or go to Bob Bondurant and stuff like that. But, those days have been eclipsed by newer technology, these inexpensive data acquisition systems that a driving coach can help you with. And there's a zillion things on YouTube to watch. So those things alone, and also hiring coaches, you can hire a good coach that can give you some pointers. So my feeling is, the speed secret is a tire pressure gauge, and be diligent about it, and have a little notebook you keep in the car. Just a simple little notebook, just, like a 2x3 inch or a 3x5 inch notebook. Keep records of the tire pressures. Keep track of the outside temperature, what the temperature of the day is, what the tire pressures are. Do that, and then have a simple little data acquisition system that you can use that just show you what your G lateral and G longitudinal is, and those are some super powerful tools.
Good stuff.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes the most simple thing is a tire pressure gauge in a notebook. And then, as you say, it's so easy to access good quality information these days. Unfortunately, it's easy to access bad quality information as well. Hopefully, I'm not putting too much of that out there. So,
well, I was going to say, when it comes to driver coaching, I've seen some people that are so-called coaches that don't know they're just not good drivers, and they're not good coaches.
Yeah.
So it's like finding a good psychiatrist. I guess you have to go through a couple until you find one that you feel works for you, as far as the way they express information to you, and you feel as though you get that information from them, and then you go out and run the car the next session, and your times are improving.
Yeah.
If not sharing information with you that actually improve your time, then you have the wrong coach.
Yep. Absolutely. So, Craig, thank you for your time. This has been really fun and interesting, and like I said, just after years of seeing you in the pits, it's always fun to kind of connect and talk some more. So, and anybody that's a good friend of Johannes is a good friend of mine. So, one of my favorite people in the world. So, again, Craig, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing your information.
I appreciate it. And also, I was going to mention one thing about those tractive dampers. Do you want to talk about those at all?
Oh, yeah. Just quickly, because we do need to kind of wrap this thing up. But yeah.
Yeah. This tractive damper in Holland, we've been working with Johannes. I've been working a lot with them. It's dampers that self-control themselves over. They'll adjust themselves 60 times a second. So the beauty of them is you don't have to run stiff sway bars and so on and so forth. They'll support the car as you go into a turn. They'll stiffen the outside dampers. They'll soften the inside dampers. When you brake, they'll stiffen the front dampers and they'll soften the rear dampers. When you accelerate, they'll stiffen the rear dampers and they'll soften the front dampers. So it helps with oversteer, helps with your braking, helps all those things. So it's an exciting time to work with that technology that the F1 teams paid millions of dollars to develop, and now we can buy for a couple $1,000. It's crazy.
How cool is that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. How cool is that? And they can get information if a listener wants more information on that. How do they find out more about the tractive suspension
just tractive dampers or tractive.com. It's you're at the right site with if the shows the company is in Holland.
Yep.
And so you can go there.
And I'll put those links in the show notes as well. So thanks for sharing that, and for catching me on that. Make sure that we covered that, because that's really good information. Thanks Greg.
You're welcome. Appreciate it, Ross.
And keep having fun out there.
Thank you. I will.
Did you know Ross's Speed Secrets books are the #1 best-selling race driving technique books in the world? For example, if you're a race driver or want the most of your high-performance driving, you'll want Ultimate Speed Secrets. It covers everything from the ideal cornering line to vehicle dynamics and car setup, the all-important mental game, as well as how to make a career in motorsports. For many drivers, this is the go-to resource, something you can go back to over and over again throughout your driving career. Ross's latest book is The Lost Art of High-Performance Driving. If you're wondering how to get the most out of your modern high-performance car and have a passion for being the best driver you can be, both on the track and the street, you'll want to read this book. Not only does it give you tools and techniques, it will also help you develop the motivation to take your driving to the next level. You can check out all of Ross's books at speedsecrets.com/books or buy them at Amazon or any book retailer. It's a chance to read, keep learning, and have some fun.